Are you skipping the most important phase of the mixing process? Rob here from musicianonamission.com, and over the next few minutes you're going to learn how to set instrument levels in a mix and balance your tracks like a pro, so you can make drastic improvements to your mixes by focusing on getting the volume of your individual channels right. But before we continue, make sure you grab the free volume balancing cheat sheet to make sure you actually practice doing this and then get it right every time. So first of all, what is volume balancing? Well, it's simply the act of adjusting the volume faders and making sure every instrument is at the appropriate or right volume for the track. And this is actually where the bulk of the mix comes from. I'd say 80% of the mix comes from this phase of the mixing process, just making sure everything's at the right volume. And it's incredible how much of a difference this can make. So you want to spend plenty of time here. Don't skip ahead too soon. Personally, I spend around 30 to 60 minutes here, depending on the size of the project. And old school engineers relied on volume balancing alone. They used to be called balance engineers instead of mix engineers, and they'd use very little or no EQ or compression. And that's actually still the case if you're working with acoustic based genres like classical music, jazz music, a lot of folk music. It pretty much comes solely down to the volume balance and then just a tiny bit of EQ and compression here and there. Now, a lot of people have forgotten this, especially if you're mixing electronic music, pop music, rock music, that kind of stuff where there's lots of processing. So you get distracted by plugins and toys, which is a huge error. So how I recommend you approach volume balancing is to think of it in height order. And this is how I think of it. What are you meant to do? You're meant to just bring all the faders up? How are you meant to get started with this? Well, I recommend starting with the most important element, then bringing in elements one by one in order of importance. And that's where we get this idea of high order. Start with the most important element, the tallest element, and then we work backwards from there. So think of it as ranging the volume balance in height order. We want the vocals to be at the very top, and then down at the bottom we want things like guitars that aren't important, or percussion, that kind of stuff. Now, usually the key element here is the vocal or the drum. Sometimes it might be the guitar, but generally vocals or the snare in rock or the kick in hip hop, something like that. And if you are going to start with the drums, you can go one level deeper and think of high order within the drums. So within the drum kit itself, are you going to start with the kick or are you going to start with the snare? That's going to depend on the genre. And then once you've brought that up, just, set it at 0, which is how I start. I'll choose the most important element, set the fader to 0, and then start bringing everything around it. So once you've done that, you can move on to the other parts. Now, I want to talk to you a second about what I call Occam's mixing. And this comes from the principle of Occam's razor, which is used in philosophy and science. And this is the stated principle that all things being equal, the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. Now, we can apply this to mixing in general, and I think this is absolutely crucial, not just volume balancing, but the entire production process. The simplest solution is normally the correct one. The best path forward is normally simple. Don't overcomplicate things. So how do we apply that? Well, a slight adjustment of a volume fader can do a lot more than EQ, compression, or a lot of other processes. So remember that. The simplest thing, just nudging the volume fader slightly, can make a huge difference. Often people will address problems that can be solved with volume balancing using EQ, compression, different plugins, and that's a huge mistake. Always go for the simplest solution. If the low end in a track is slightly too loud, don't go to the mix bus and apply a cut to the low end. Just bring down the volume of the bass. It's normally that simple, and just see if a slight volume adjustment will help. Now, it's impossible to make a video about volume balancing without mentioning volume automation and the importance of this, because it's nearly impossible to get an even mix throughout the song. Verses and choruses are going to differ. For example, the guitar part is too loud in a verse, but then it gets buried in the chorus. If you just use the volume fader on its own, you're never going to get a perfect volume balance. So the solution here is to use volume automation. And this isn't complicated, it's not advanced. If you're new to this idea of automation, you just draw it in, or you can just hit the record automation button in your DAW and move the fader as the song's playing. There's multiple ways to do this. You need to look into that and find out how it works in your DAW. But essentially what we're trying to do here is just automate entire sections when needed. So let's go back to the example. If you balance the guitar part in the chorus, which is I recommend where you start, you just loop the chorus, get the volume balance going there. But then you notice that same guitar part is too loud in the verse. Well, just automate down that whole section of the guitar part. You just highlight it and automate it down so that it's quieter in the verse, and then it automatically gets louder when it needs to in the chorus. And then once you've automated whole sections, you can then go a layer deeper. And if you need to bring smaller sections up or down, you can exaggerate different phrases on different parts throughout the song, or you can even automate individual words. If you need to do that, do it. If there's words that are getting buried, parts that are getting buried, that's when you need volume automation. And this is how it's going to look in your DAW. You can just turn up or turn down certain sections, phrases, anything you want. So just a quick recap here before I move into a demonstration. First of all, volume balancing is the foundation of every mix. Don't forget that. You want to set a good balance at the beginning and then come back and readdress this throughout the mix. Start by bringing up the faders in order of importance. Remember that high order. Start with the most important element and then bring things in order of importance. And then remember that a small volume adjustment can make a big difference. Don't always skip to plugins when you could just change the volume slightly. And once you've done all of that, remember that you'll also have to use automation when you need it to make sure you have the right balance throughout the song, because one section might be perfect, another one's not, so you need to automate that. So we're going to jump into a live demonstration now. If you want to recap all of that and make sure you've got it there next time you mix and you can actually implement that, go and download the free volume balancing cheat sheet. That's going to help you to get this right every single time. You can go to the link in the video, the link in the description below, or just go to musicianonamission.com/balancing cheat sheet. Okay, so let's jump into Logic. So I've got a track here. I've just roughly organized it. There's nothing really gone on here. I've just put them in the right order that I want. And what I'm going to do now is first of all just check the gain. I'm just going to hit play and see if there's any channels that are too loud before we move into the volume balance. So yeah, you can already see we're clipping on the mix bus and there's a couple of channels here that are pretty hot. So let's just grab the gain tool and go ahead and cut some of those hot tracks. So that's good. We're not clipping on the mix bus now. We've got plenty of headroom. So what I'm going to do is just bring down all of these channels, every single one. And we're going to start with just the lead vocal. And what I've done is just set this to 0, and that gives us then a point of reference. The lead vocal is the most important thing in most cases. You might be starting with the kick or snare, but whatever you start with, set it to 0, and then let's start bringing things in around it. So I think with this kind of music, after the lead vocal, maybe the next important thing is the kick, and then I'm going to start bringing in the guitars. And also notice I've looped the loudest section of the song. So we want to start with the climax. For pretty much the entire mix, we want to start by looping the climax of the song, and then we can go back and work with the rest of the track afterwards. So let's dive right in. Time to get paid on the seconds of civility. Never not paid. You're no product of the way to say. You're no woman, you're born to be free. You're no product of the way to say. So we've kind of got the guitars in now. I think next is going to be the snare, and then probably the bass, and then we can start to bring in the rest of the drum kit. Time to get paid on the seconds of civility. Never not paid. You're no product of the way to say. You're no woman, you're born to be free. I don't really like the tone on that bass amp, so what I'm going to do is just leave that out. I'm not going to use that. Instead, I'm going to use this DI for now, and probably later in the mix I'll use an amp simulation on this to get the tone I want. But for now, for balancing, let's just do the DI. Time to get paid on the seconds of civility. Never not paid. You're no product of the way to say. You're no woman, you're born to be free. You're no product of the way to say. So there we go, just a quick start there. You can see the approach that I have with this, just bringing in things one by one in order of importance. We've then got a good starting point. So this is just a starting point. I'd probably spend another half hour on this, just getting the volume balance, checking the sections, going through the whole song, checking I haven't missed anything. There's a load of guitars here that haven't cropped up yet, but that's the starting point. So go away and actually implement this. This is so important because this is so foundational. And if you skip over this phase and don't have a good system for approaching this, then you're doing yourself a huge disservice, and you could really suffer down the line. When you then start to bring in plugins, if your balance isn't good, it's never going to sound great. So make sure you download the free cheat sheet. I put it together just for this video, and that's going to help you to go through this step by step and actually practice doing this in your mixes so that you can then start to get this right every single time and make your mixes sound more professional. So that's all for today. Hope you enjoyed watching. Be sure to grab that cheat sheet, and I'll see you next week.